The drugs, there is a risk of very significant interaction, that in fact the pumping action of the heart may fail altogether.
We had invited Professor Smith, an expert in the effects of drug treatment, to give his opinion of the drug regime at Chelmsford.
Those are really my reactions, that these were enormous doses. Even if they were justified, even if there were good clinical evidence that putting patients in this sort of state were associated with relief of their mental symptoms, it would seem to me absolutely indefensible that this form of treatment should be carried on anywhere but somewhere where skilled nursing and skilled medical management could obtain. And for my money, that means for most part an intensive care unit.
By 1978, there had been 24 deaths at Chelmsford that we now know were directly linked to the treatment. So why was this scandalous situation allowed to continue? One reason is that there was systematic cover-up by Dr. Bailey of the evidence which connected deep sleep treatment and the deaths. Even by the time of the first inquest, Dr. Bailey had already told lies about the deaths of 8 patients, and by 1977, he'd filled in a total of 17 death certificates with false information.
A lot of people accepted what Dr. Bailey in particular told them as the truth without questioning it, partly because of the status they had and partly because of his knowledge and the force of his personality. He himself was involved in cover-up. There is no doubt that there were death certificates filled in falsely by him. No doubt about that whatsoever.
One of the major puzzles at Chelmsford is why the staff allowed Bailey to act as he did.
So I wasn't aware that they didn't die of what Bailey was putting on the medical certificate, because what he put on the medical certificate, he told us is what they died of. And we had to believe that. Except in the case of Miriam, when we could see outward signs that it wasn't, it was something that was very apparent to all of the staff that she had some abdominal problem. So we wouldn't have worn heart attack on that one.
The treatment was covered up, but even when it was publicised, it seems that nobody wanted to know. Barry Hart's story got front-page coverage in 1975.
The response that article got in the paper was deafening. I got nothing at all. Nobody rang me, no lawyers rang me, no psychiatrists or doctors, no politicians or public servants and saying, what can we do to help you? Just nothing. Yet at that time in 1975, you already had a coroner's inquest, 2 or 3 serious complaints to the Department of Health about what was going on in Chelmsford, and nothing was done.
In the mid-70s, Barry Hart was a lone voice, but by 1978, the state's youngest ever Attorney General reacted to pressure from a campaign by a citizens' rights group about the Chelmsford deaths and decided to take action.
Well, it was a horror story. I'd been presented with 16 cases and suggestion there were a lot more of deaths that seemed to be very much related to the treatment that was being received there. There's long coma therapy, which is a very untried and doubtful medical procedure, electroconvulsive therapy being used with gay abandon, and there didn't seem to be much medical supervision at this private hospital. It was a frightening story where obviously a lot of people had died and could have died in circumstances that there should have been trials of people for serious crimes. So I wrote to the Minister for Health in our government at the time, seeking an investigation into the hospital.
What happened as a result of your letter?
I received a reply from a colleague which indicated that there was a full investigation to be made into the matter.
Your colleague was the Minister of Health?
Yes, Mr. Kevin Stewart. Kevin was a very amiable, kindly man. He was not the sort of minister to buck his departmental head. He was not an interventionist minister at all. And he would accept the advice he received from his departmental head. That was the nature of the man, and there was no investigation. And like me, he has to take responsibility for that. But I think that the real reason nothing happened was the department was not prepared to move.
So who finally was responsible?
Yes, the head of the department was a man named McEwen. His nickname in the public service was Rocky. He was a very powerful character too, a man in the old style of bureaucrats. And my view was that he was responsible for the lack of investigation. He was head of the department. his minister received a letter from an Attorney-General and had to be treated at the highest level, and I think responsibility has to rest there.
We've obtained further evidence of the Department of Health's failure to investigate Chelmsford. It's revealed in a confidential report prepared by the department's complaints unit. The report says that despite the Minister of Health advising the Attorney-General that a detailed review had been undertaken, no complaints were ever made about any of the matters at Chelmsford, nor is there any evidence of any detailed investigation. The author of the report has agreed to talk to us about her findings.
The complaints about de-sleep demanded a cooperation from a number of departments. No one person seemed to take responsibility for the investigation and coordinate the responses or responsibilities. So there's no clarity, there was no coordination. There was a lack of expertise, which clearly led to the lack of coordination because no one knew what they were supposed to be doing or indeed accepted responsibility. Doctors are very reluctant to criticise other doctors. Now here we had a Department of Health which was doctor-led. In those days the Department of Health was mainly administered by doctors at senior levels who had very little management experience, who belonged to the culture of doctors, who believed that this notion of clinical freedom. So that in a way generated the culture that was to exist in the department, and that was doctors were independent. They alone determined treatment. They were not to be questioned by other doctors, let alone the bureaucracy.
Mr. James Rhymes was head of the Department of Health from 1961 to 1973, a period during which 16 patients died at Chelmsford. It was the job of his department to license and inspect private hospitals, a role which failed to uncover the extent of the problems at Chelmsford. But as he solemnly told a government inquiry, his staff did very good measuring for the size of doors and staircases and inspecting food.
It would be very difficult for nurses who are inspectors to visit a private hospital in the 70s and comment about treatment issues.
They had an enormous responsibility to do something about it. They were going in there every year doing checks. They go in there with blinkers on because they just didn't see these people lying unconscious, groaning, moaning, lying in their own faeces. Was the hospital cleaned up that day that they didn't see it? You know, there was a moral responsibility here, not just that the legislation gave them the jurisdiction to do something about it. These people in the health department saw what was going on and took no action. And that, we say, is where the moral responsibility for the government rests.
By 1978, there was overwhelming evidence about the dangerous treatment at Chelmsford and that there'd been an unacceptable number of deaths. Dr. Bailey did nothing to stop it. Neither did Dr. Heron, Dr. Gardner, nor Dr. Gill. It took a young psychiatrist who used Chelmsford occasionally for his patients to blow the whistle.
I really had a few doubts about deep sleep, but I had no idea it had been death. Psychiatrists expect the occasional suicide, and perhaps once in their lifetime, hopefully not, you get a drug death, but to have deaths from any other source is just totally unacceptable. And so I knew we had to do something, or I felt, you know, absolutely compelled to do something to stop it.
Dr. Botcher arranged a meeting at a fellow doctor's house where he and a group of psychiatrist colleagues challenged Dr. Heron about the treatment at Chelmsford.
So by the end of the meeting, Dr. Heron hadn't accepted any of the arguments that you put?
Hadn't impressed him one tiny bit. It had all bounced right off him. He was used to people, as an administrator, he was used to people disagreeing.